After my wife abandoned me for an entire month to play house with our hot new neighbor, she came crawling back, but I'd already filed for divorce because I refused to be her backup option. You got it. Here's a version of your script rephrased for a different YouTube channel, keeping the original length and no bolding. I'm sharing a personal journey today, something that has truly reshaped my perspective. My name is Mike, 31 years old, and until recently, I believe my life was perfectly on course. I've always been someone who prefers simplicity, no grand ambitions, no major disruptions. I had a steady job as a software developer, a comfortable home in a peaceful neighborhood, and what I thought was a strong marriage with a woman I genuinely loved. Laura and I first crossed paths almost 8 years ago. It honestly feels like an eternity. I was 23, fresh out of college, navigating my first job, and quite innocent about life's complexities. She was 22, working as an assistant at a marketing agency, trying to define her own career. Interestingly, she never quite found her path and eventually became a homemaker. Our first encounter was at a casual backyard barbecue hosted by a mutual friend, one of those relaxed get-togethers where paper plates are abundant and someone inevitably burns the burgers. She approached me with a witty remark about how I seemed to be planning my exit. I can't recall my precise reply, but her laughter was infectious, and we spent the rest of the evening in conversation. From that point, things accelerated. We started dating, and it felt like she infused excitement into my otherwise predictable and orderly existence. Laura was adventurous and spontaneous, always suggesting impromptu road trips or new restaurants she'd heard about. Meanwhile, I remained the grounded one. I was the person who'd manage the budget, check the weather, and confirm the gas tank was full before we embarked. It appeared to work well. We balanced each other. She introduced vibrancy into my life, and I offered the stability she claimed was missing from her previous relationships. After 3 years of dating, we decided to marry. Our wedding was intimate, with only family and close friends present. Neither of us came from affluent backgrounds, so there wasn't a grand ballroom or lavish catering, but that wasn't important to us. Following the wedding, we began building our life together. We bought a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, not the most glamorous location, but it held promise. For the most part, life felt steady. When I returned home from work, Laura was typically in the kitchen or on the couch, engrossed in her phone. She would recount the day's events. Working in marketing at the time, there was always some client or coworker drama, and I listened. This was our dynamic. She was the narrator, and I was the attentive audience. We chose not to have children, a mutual decision. Laura wasn't in a hurry, and neither was I. We both preferred to wait until we were more financially secure and truly prepared for that significant next phase. We seemed to agree on most matters. Reflecting now, I wonder if I became overly complacent. It's easy to fall into a routine, especially when life feels secure. I would wake, go to work, come home, and repeat. Of course, we had our date nights, usually involving dinner at one of our preferred restaurants or a movie, but I believe I stopped noticing the subtle cues, like how Laura seemed to thrive on attention. It wasn't particularly alarming, at least not initially. She's the kind of person who brightens a room, and people naturally gravitate toward her. I suppose I began to take her vivacity and warmth for granted, expecting them to be an everlasting part of our shared life. At that time, I wasn't concerned. I assumed we were firmly established. Sure, we had our disagreements occasionally, as all marriages do. Most of the time, they revolved around minor issues, such as my forgetting to take out the trash, or her leaving her shoes scattered throughout the house. Nothing substantial, but relationships have this peculiar characteristic. They can appear perfectly sound externally, while cracks form silently beneath the surface. If left unaddressed, those fissures can widen and cause the entire foundation to crumble. I didn't foresee it not then. I believed we were constructing something robust and enduring, but sometimes life has a way of proving you wrong. Then a new individual entered our sphere. Jake moved in next door when his previous neighbors, an elderly couple, downsized and relocated to Florida. He was approximately 28 years old at the time, making him younger than most residents in the neighborhood. He was a personal trainer, fit, self-assured, and, I must admit, perhaps a bit too attractive for his own good. He possessed the kind of physique that commanded a second glance, as if he'd just stepped out of an action film. Jake was immediately noticeable upon his arrival, not only due to his appearance, but also because he was perpetually outside engaged in some activity, washing his car, mowing the lawn, installing a pull-up bar in his yard. There always seemed to be a reason for him to be shirtless. He quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. Laura spotted him right away. How could she not? Our first interaction with Jake occurred when he came over to introduce himself one Saturday morning while we were in the yard. He was congenial, the type of person who could charm anyone. Laura initiated a conversation with him almost immediately, inquiring about his origin, his profession, and his impressions of the neighborhood. I recall standing there, offering smiles and nods, barely able to contribute while the two of them conversed like old friends. At the time, I didn't dwell on it. Laura was outgoing. She spoke to everyone. She'd be just as chatty with the mailman or the hardware store clerk. It never struck me as unusual that she was interested in Jake, but looking back, I can discern the subtle shifts that followed. It began with casual chats. Laura invariably found a reason to join Jake outside. Initially, it involved minor tasks like retrieving the mail, watering plants, and taking out the trash. However, these brief chores consistently extended into 10 or 15-minute conversations with Jake. I once returned home from work and discovered them conversing in the driveway. Laura was holding a basket of laundry she had been carrying to the garage, and Jake was leaning casually against his car, laughing at something she had said. When I approached, they both turned to me, and Laura downplayed it. Jake was just telling me about his new gym equipment, she explained casually. It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Laura decided to bake cookies, something she hadn't done in months. I didn't think much of it until I observed her walking across the yard with a plate of cookies in hand. Just being neighborly, she remarked when I questioned her about it. I shrugged it off. Laura's behavior in this regard wasn't out of character. She had previously brought brownies to other neighbors. But then there was the occasion she purchased a new set of athletic wear, bright, fitted leggings, and a matching top, which wasn't something she typically wore. When I asked her about it, she said she was contemplating restarting jogging, to get back into shape, she explained. I didn't question it. Laura had gone through fitness phases before, where she would become enthusiastic about working out for a month or two before losing interest. But this time, her timing was impeccable. Jake jogged almost every morning. I'd see him out there, headphones in, completing laps around the street. Laura determined her new jogging routine would commence at the same time Jake was out there. I noticed them speaking on the sidewalk one morning as I was leaving for work. Laura was stretching, and Jake was demonstrating a technique to prevent shin splints. I didn't say anything, just a brief wave, and drove away, but something about that scene resonated with me. Around this period, I also observed changes in Laura's phone habits. She had always been on her phone, browsed social media, and communicating with friends, but now she appeared wary when I entered the room. She would swiftly lock her screen or flip her phone over, as if she didn't want me to see anything. One night, I observed her scrolling through Instagram, and when I looked over, I saw Jake's name at the top. She quickly swiped past it, but I saw enough to know she was viewing his profile. When I asked her about it, she brushed it aside. I was just checking out his fitness posts, she told me. He has some good workout advice. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go, but the subtle signs continued to accumulate. Another day, I was working in the garage and heard laughter emanating from the backyard. I stepped outside to see Laura and Jake standing near the fence, laughing about something. Laura was holding an iced tea, and Jake was gesturing animatedly while narrating a story. Laura waved at me, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Jake was just telling me about this funny thing that happened at his gym, she explained later when I inquired about it. It was beginning to feel unsettling. I don't want to sound paranoid, but you can sense when something is wrong. Laura's conversations about Jake had a newfound vibrancy. She'd casually mentioned things he'd said or done, such as, Jake's thinking about getting a dog, or Jake recommended this great protein shake. It wasn't merely the words themselves, but the way she uttered them. Then there were the glances. You know what I mean? When we were outside and Jake was nearby, I noticed Laura steal small glances in his direction. It was subtle, but once you observe it, you can't ignore it. At this juncture, I had yet to say anything. Part of me refused to entertain the thought that there was anything to be concerned about. Laura was someone I trusted. We had been together for years, and I believed we had a strong relationship. But another part of me, the one that couldn't disregard the pattern, began to question. I chose to remain silent for the time being, but I started to pay closer attention. If something was indeed happening, I had to witness it for myself. It was a Saturday morning, and I remember it vividly because it began so typically. I woke early, as is my habit, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, reading the news on my phone. Laura was still in bed, which was not surprising. She enjoyed her leisurely mornings, particularly on weekends. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the coffee machine in the background, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of calm. It's ironic how that works. You think everything is fine because you have no idea what's about to unfold. Laura entered the kitchen about an hour later. She was in her pajamas, her hair disheveled from sleep, holding her phone in one hand and rubbing her eyes with the other. She sat across from me at the table, and I immediately sensed something was amiss. She radiated nervous energy, drumming her fingers on the table and gazing at her phone as if deliberately avoiding eye contact. Are you okay? I inquired, setting down my phone. She nodded quickly before shaking her head. Actually, no, she responded with a deep sigh. We need to talk. Anyone who has been in a relationship understands that those 4 words rarely bring good news. My stomach nodded, but I tried to maintain my composure. All right, I murmured, leaning back in my chair. What's going on? Laura paused, her gaze flitting around the room as if searching for the appropriate words. Finally, she looked at me and said, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jake. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. What? I asked, leaning forward as if proximity would bring clarity to her words. She bit her lip, appearing profoundly uncomfortable. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said hurriedly, as if wanting to preempt my reaction. It just happened. I've been spending time with Jake, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused. Confused. That word affected me more than anything else. She didn't merely express guilt or admit to a mistake. She expressed confusion, as if grappling with a perplexing riddle. I stared at her, trying to grasp the meaning of her words. My thoughts raced. Was she indicating a desire to leave? Was she asking for a divorce? Was she attempting to confess and move forward? I couldn't discern her intent, and that only exacerbated the situation. So, what does this mean? I inquired finally. Are you saying you're done with us? Laura shook her head rapidly. No, not necessarily, she replied. I don't know what I want right now. I love you, Mike, I truly do, but I can't stop thinking about him, and I need to understand what these feelings signify. I felt as if the ground had been pulled from beneath me. We'd been together for years, had built a life, and now she was expressing uncertainty about wanting to be with me. It was surreal. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. So, what are you suggesting? You want to take a break? She hesitated, then nodded. Kind of, she responded. I need time to figure things out. I was thinking maybe I could take a month to spend some time with Jake and see if there's something real there. If it doesn't work out, then we can focus on ourselves. I blinked, astounded by her audacity. You're serious? I asked, without even forming a question. Laura nodded, her gaze pleading. I know it sounds wild, but I don't want to discard what we have without being certain. I don't want to live with regrets, you know? Regrets. The word lingered in my mind like a persistent splinter. She was speaking of regrets as if she were the one risking everything, as if my feelings were secondary to her life-altering decisions. I sat there staring at her, a fusion of anger and incredulity simmering beneath the surface. Part of me yearned to yell at her for her self-absorption, but another part, perhaps the calmer, more calculated side, chose to remain silent and let her dig her own hole. All right, I murmured, leaning back in my chair. Laura blinked, seemingly caught off guard. Wait, really? Sure, I replied, shrugging as if it were of no great consequence. If you think that's what you need, go ahead. Her expression flickered, as if she was unsure whether I was being sincere or sarcastic. I just think it's the best way to determine where my heart truly lies, she admitted cautiously. Sure, I replied. Do what you need to do. Internally, I was already resigned. The moment she mentioned wanting to spend a month with another man, a switch flipped in my brain, but I chose not to reveal my hand just yet. If she was willing to abandon our marriage for a fantasy with a neighbor, I was curious to see how far she would go. Laura let out a relieved sigh, as if she had just been granted permission to achieve something monumental. Thank you, she replied, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I know this is a big ask, but I truly believe it's the right thing for us. I stood up and retrieved my coffee mug, pulling my hand away. Sure, I repeated, my voice flat. If that's what you need. She said nothing further, simply sat there, most likely contemplating the fact that I wasn't arguing or resisting, but inside, I was already formulating my plan. Laura spent the subsequent few days packing a modest bag. She informed me she'd be staying with Jake, making it sound casual, as if it were merely a temporary arrangement. She didn't appear to grasp that I wasn't asking questions or expressing any resistance. When Laura departed, the house felt different, not exactly empty, but quieter, as if someone had turned down the volume on my life. I stood in the living room after she left, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and stared at the door. I expected to feel anger or heartbreak, but all I felt was a peculiar sense of calm, as if the burden of pretending everything was fine had finally been lifted. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood there trying to comprehend what had just transpired. My wife, with whom I had spent years and expected to spend my life, had left to figure things out with the guy next door. If it hadn't been my reality, I would have assumed it was some outlandish TV drama. The initial few days felt strange. I began to notice the small items she'd left behind, her favorite cup on the kitchen counter, a pair of shoes near the entrance, and a blanket draped over the back of the couch. I considered moving them, but ultimately decided to leave them where they were, not because I missed her, but because I didn't want to expend the energy. I immersed myself in work, taking on extra assignments to fill my schedule. I stayed late at the office, not out of necessity, but because I didn't want to return home to an empty house. When I wasn't working, I frequented the gym. I had never been a regular gym goer before, but there was something cathartic about pushing myself physically, as if I could sweat out all my stress. Friends started to sense that something was amiss. A few of them inquired about Laura's absence, and I responded vaguely. "She's staying with a friend for a while," I explained, trying to sound nonchalant. I wasn't ready to delve into the true narrative yet. My father was the only one I confided in. I contacted him a few days after Laura left, and the first thing he asked was, "What's wrong?" He's always possessed an uncanny ability to read me, even over the phone. When I informed him of what had transpired, there was a prolonged silence on the other end of the call. Then he added, "Well, son, I hate to say it, but it sounds like you're better off without her." At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. I anticipated him to be more upset or ask more questions, but then he said something that resonated deeply with me. "If she doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for her to figure it out?" He was right. I'd spent so much time trying to rationalize Laura's decision and pinpoint my own shortcomings that I hadn't considered what I deserved. I wasn't merely a backup plan in case her dalliance with Jake didn't materialize. That night, I sat in the darkened living room, gazing at our wedding photo on the mantel. We appeared so content in that image, so certain of our future, but now it simply served as a painful reminder of everything that had gone awry. By the end of the week, I had reached my decision. I was not going to idly wait for Laura to make her grand choice. I was going to make my own. The next day, I contacted a divorce attorney. Sitting in that lawyer's office felt surreal. I recounted the scenario, striving to maintain a steady voice, even though a part of me still couldn't believe it was true. The lawyer listened intently, nodding as I spoke, and when I finished, he replied, "You are entirely within your rights to file for divorce. This type of situation falls under irreconcilable differences." Hearing those words made everything click into place. Irreconcilable differences. This is what we had become. Laura and I were no longer on the same page, and perhaps we never truly had been. The lawyer guided me through the process, outlining what I needed to do and what I could anticipate. By the time I left his office, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, as if I had finally reclaimed control of my life. Back home, I began taking small steps to prepare for the inevitable. I transferred some funds to a separate account in case things became complicated later. I walked through the house and started mentally dividing what belonged to me and what belonged to her. I didn't physically touch her belongings yet. I figured I'd wait until things were official, but in my mind, I was already planning how the house would appear without her presence. The days extended into weeks, and I grew accustomed to the quiet. It wasn't as dreadful as I expected. In fact, it felt genuinely tranquil. I didn't have to contend with Laura's continuous chatter or the minor disagreements over trivial matters like whose turn it was to do the dishes. Meanwhile, I started hearing things through the grapevine. A neighbor reported seeing Laura and Jake at the park, looking quite comfortable together. Another person claimed to have seen them at a cafe downtown. I nodded and smiled as if nothing bothered me, but inside, I was filled with a mixture of anger and pity. Anger because she had discarded everything we possessed for a fleeting affair with a man who was unlikely to commit. Pity because I knew it wouldn't end well for her. Jake did not strike me as the type to settle down, and Laura was about to discover that the hard way. By the third week, I had ceased checking my phone for Laura's texts. I assumed if she wanted to communicate, she'd reach out, but I wasn't holding my breath. I was done waiting for her. One night, while tidying the garage, I came upon a box of old photographs from when Laura and I first met. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness as I remembered how joyful we had been back then. But then I recalled all the subtle red flags I'd disregarded over the years, all the times I'd prioritized her desires over mine without even realizing it. I closed and put the box away. I didn't need those memories. Laura decided to make her dramatic reappearance almost exactly a month ago today. I had heard nothing substantial from her during her brief trial with Jake. The few texts she sent were vague at best. "Hope you're doing okay," or "We'll chat when I get back." She didn't even try to keep me updated or pretend she was torn about her decision. It was as if she had already dismissed me as Plan B. By this point, I had stopped caring. I wasn't waiting by the door for her to come to her senses. I wasn't pacing the house wondering what she and Jake were doing. I had filed for divorce, and my lawyer had already begun drafting the paperwork. As far as I was concerned, the marriage was over, but I didn't tell her that just yet. When she walked through the door, nothing seemed to have changed, at least from her perspective. She had her bag draped over her shoulder, her hair neatly styled, and a confident expression on her face, as if she'd just returned from a pleasant trip and was expecting me to greet her with open arms. "Hey," she said, placing her luggage by the door. "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through channels, and barely looked up. "Welcome back," I murmured, my tone remaining neutral. She paused as if she was anticipating more of a reaction. When I didn't jump up or inquire how it went, she walked over and perched on the arm of the couch. We should talk, she stated quietly and carefully. I turned to face her and muted the TV. All right, I replied, crossing my arms. Talk. Laura offered the kind of smile she used when she was trying to smooth things over. I've done a lot of thinking, she told me, and I've realized some things about myself, about us, about what I want. I simply nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath as if she were preparing to deliver an impassioned declaration. I care about you, Mike, I truly do, and I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have. Rebuild, she stated it as if it were as straightforward as repairing a leaky faucet. I didn't say anything, simply looked at her, allowing her to fill the silence. She was perplexed by my quietness, but she persevered. Jake's a great guy, she remarked, and I had to bite my tongue to stifle a laugh at how casually she mentioned him. But I realized he's not what I need. He's fun, sure, but he's immature. He doesn't have the stability that you have, and I think I was just caught up in the excitement of it all. There it was, her grand revelation. She tried out the shiny new toy and decided she preferred the familiar one. Uh-huh, I replied, my voice cool. Laura blinked as if she expected a more intense response. I know I've hurt you, she murmured, reaching out and touching my arm, but I truly believe we can get past this. We've been through so much together, Mike. We have history. That's not something you simply discard. I allowed her to continue. I let her unload all of her perfectly practiced phrases about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. When she finished speaking, I rose and walked over to the kitchen counter. I unlocked a drawer, pulled out the divorce papers my lawyer had sent over, and placed them on the table in front of her. What's this? She inquired, her smile fading. Divorce papers, I explained simply. Her face turned ashen. You're kidding, she exclaimed, letting out a frightened laugh. Nope, I replied, leaning against the counter, arms folded. I'm not kidding. For a moment, she stared at the papers as if she couldn't comprehend what she saw. Then she glanced up at me with wide eyes. You're divorcing me? Yeah, I said, my voice steady. I'm not interested in being your second choice, Laura. Her face transformed from shock to anger in an instant. Second choice, she demanded. That's not what this is. I was confused, Mike. I needed time to figure things out, and in the process, you decided to test the waters with another man. I added calmly. You left. You walked out on our marriage, and now you're back because it didn't work out with him. Do you honestly think I'm just going to take you back as if nothing happened? Laura opened her mouth to argue before closing it again, her face growing red. It's not like that, she responded, her voice quivering. I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to stay and resent you. I thought. She trailed off, her gaze darting across the room. You thought you could have it both ways. I completed for her. She stood up and crossed her arms. You're making a mistake, Mike. We can fix this. I know we can. No, I replied firmly. We can't. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She appeared to be on the verge of tears, but I didn't let that sway me. I had already made up my mind. The remainder of the conversation was indistinct. She tried to argue and induce guilt in me to change my mind. She spoke of our history, our home, and even the prospect of starting a family someday, but nothing worked. Finally, she stormed out of the house. I stood there for a time, staring at the empty space where she had been, without feeling anything. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts, only relief. Later that night, I called my lawyer to inform him that Laura had seen the paperwork. He asked, how'd she take it? Not great, I remarked, smirking. Do you want to give her time to process, or should we move forward? Move forward, I instructed without hesitation. It wasn't easy confronting Laura, but it was ultimately the correct decision. She viewed me as a fallback option in case her brief entanglement didn't work out, and if she believed I'd accept that, she clearly didn't know me as well as she imagined. I knew she wouldn't surrender easily. Laura wasn't the type to simply walk away from a confrontation, especially one in which she perceived herself to be losing. I had barely sat down when my phone buzzed with a text from her. This isn't over. I gazed at the message for a second before locking my phone and tossing it onto the couch. She was correct. It wasn't over, not yet, but it would be soon enough. The following several days were quite eventful, to say the least. Laura arrived unannounced the next evening, pounding on the door as if she were trying to break it down. Mike, open the door, she exclaimed. I opened it, maintaining a calm demeanor. What do you want, Laura? She rushed past me and stormed into the living room, as if she still resided there. We need to talk, she stated, pacing back and forth. You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things. I leaned against the door frame and crossed my arms. You had your chance, I replied quietly. You made your decision when you left. That's not fair, she responded, her voice rising. I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out, to make sure I wasn't making a mistake by staying. I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. And in doing that, you proved you didn't value what we had. You don't test a marriage by running off to someone else, Laura. That's not how it works. She paused her pacing and turned to face me, her eyes blazing with frustration. I was confused, she remarked, her voice shaking. I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us, Mike. I want to fix this. Too late, I replied, my tone strong. You don't get to come back now just because things didn't work out with Jake. Her face contorted in rage, and she aimed a finger at me. You're being petty, she said. You're throwing away everything we built over one mistake. I shook my head, maintaining my composure. It wasn't just one mistake, Laura, it was a series of choices. You chose to flirt with Jake, you chose to prioritize your feelings for him over our marriage, and then you chose to leave. Those weren't accidents. They were decisions. She opened her lips to argue, but then stopped, her shoulders sagging. For the first time, she appeared defeated. What am I supposed to do now? She inquired quietly. I sighed, feeling a flicker of pity for her despite everything she had done. That's not my problem anymore, I explained. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. She waited for another minute, looking as if she wanted to say anything else, but then she walked out without saying a word. Following that, the divorce proceedings progressed swiftly. Laura attempted to prolong things at first, perhaps expecting I would change my mind. She even tried to portray herself as the victim in front of our mutual acquaintances, accusing me of being cold and cruel. My father, however, was entirely on my side. When I told him about the scenario, he let out a low whistle. She's got some nerve, he commented, but I'm proud of you, son. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do. Laura's delaying tactics proved ineffective. My lawyer was sharp, and the clear evidence of her leaving for Jake simplified matters. She attempted to plead for spousal support, asserting she had given up her profession for the marriage, but the judge did not accept it. Finally, we reached a reasonable settlement. She received a modest sum of money and some of the furniture she'd chosen, but I retained the house and most of my savings. It was not ideal, but it was better than I had anticipated. The final hearing was bittersweet. Sitting in that courtroom, signing the documents that would officially conclude our marriage, felt strange. I glanced across at Laura a few times. She appeared exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her lawyer handed her a pen, and for a brief moment, I assumed she was not going to sign. But eventually, she scrawled her name at the bottom of the sheet, completing the transaction. Following the hearing, she approached me in the hallway. Mike, she spoke softly, just above a whisper. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at her, hoping to recognize the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, but all I saw was someone I used to know. I know you are, I replied, but sorry doesn't fix this. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out to hug me, but I pulled away. Take care of yourself, Laura, I whispered, starting to walk away. I'd occasionally hear news about Laura through mutual contacts. Jake apparently moved on to someone else shortly after she returned to me. According to one common friend, she was currently living with a relative and devising her next steps. I didn't feel satisfied hearing about her difficulties, but I also didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her decisions, and now she was facing the consequences. One day, I encountered her at the supermarket. Our eyes met briefly, and I could see remorse etched across her face. She gave me a small, hesitant wave, but I simply nodded and continued past her. There was nothing more to say. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled the situation. Laura believed she could have it both ways. She could pursue her feelings for someone else, then return to me if it didn't work out. But life doesn't operate that way. I've learned a great deal about myself through this entire ordeal. I realize now that I deserve someone who truly values me and doesn't consider me a last resort. And if that individual exists, fantastic. If not, that's perfectly acceptable too. For the time being, my main focus is to rebuild my life on my own terms. Laura's trial run with Jake may have been her way of gaining clarity, but for me, it was a much-needed wake-up call. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more compelling real-life narratives from around you.